And now it's time for us to discuss more of these headlines and simple keywords with Adam joining us on Zoom. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning. Happy Tuesday, Lena.
Happy Tuesday indeed. Let's start off with the impending inauguration ceremony. We're getting more details about it. So our first keyword of the day.
No BTS.
Is it a disappointment or is that what the fans demanded? The committee overseeing President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's inauguration has decided to not invite K-pop sensation BTS to perform at that May 10th inauguration ceremony. And this comes kind of after a much political confusion and sort of a tug-of-war with the public that seems to be a fan of BTS and not a fan of the incoming administration.
That's right. I mean, Yoon's team cited budget constraints and an intention to promote national unity instead of glitz and glamour during the event. Park Joo-sun, who's the head of the inauguration ceremony preparation committee, proceeded to explain that Yoon said the ceremony should be small but significant, which can be achieved better by inviting the younger generation and lesser-known celebrities instead. Now, controversy first sparked earlier this month when Park suggested a BTS performance was being discussed. That faced a backlash from fans, known as ARMY, critical of the incoming president, attempting to use the boy band for political purposes. We all know what happens when we get on the wrong side of ARMY, don't we? We've seen some instances of it elsewhere. In response to the criticism, Park disagreed, saying that an inauguration ceremony for a president is not actually a political event, but more of a national ceremony held in accordance with the law. I mean, it's no stranger to have celebrities at inauguration ceremonies. In the US, for example, remember back in Obama's administration, Beyonce sang there as well.
Even in Korea, we had, Psy, big names, and we've also invited, I believe, the late Michael Jackson not too long ago. So it's a pretty big event all on its own, and I don't think its intention is by any means to be divisive, right?
Yeah, so I think that was the attempt, but I think because of that backlash from the ever-powerful ARMY, the transition team, they kind of backed down a little bit, but there also seemed to be a bit of disagreement between Yoon's camp as well, between the Presidential Transition Committee and the actual inauguration ceremony preparation committee. The Transition Committee said that it had actually never taken BTS's attendance into consideration before. 2 hours later, actually, after that statement, the inauguration committee told the media that it's not settled the matter yet. And then the transition committee again said that that's not the official stance of the Yoon administration. And there's been this kind of back and forth. They didn't quite seem to get or were on the same page. So it was a bit of a confusing time.
I mean, we can cite anything, miscommunication, trouble behind trying to put together this event rather quickly, so on forth. But for the time being, bottom line is no BTS. So then what will the inauguration ceremony actually look like?
Right. Well, it's more of an open kind of session, if you will, or an event. So members of the public will be offered a chance to attend the event through special and general applications. A number of politicians and some foreign guests will be invited as well, as usual. Whether ex-President Park Geun-hye will come remains to be seen. That is where a lot of attention is being paid to. Yoon's team had set a decision on her potential invitation would be made after Yoon visited her in Daegu yesterday. We haven't had any much details on that visit just yet. Now, the slogan for the 20th presidential inaugural ceremony has been translated roughly as "Again, Korea, new country of the people." And at the stroke of midnight on May 10th, there will be a bell ringing ceremony at Bosingat Pavilion in central Seoul as well. So it's pretty much business as usual, just no BTS.
All right, on to our second keyword of the day.
Fourth shot.
So although daily COVID cases are slowing down in the country, vulnerable groups are still very much at risk. Therefore, the government is planning to expand fourth vaccine doses to the elderly, that vulnerable group. But what's the latest on that front?
Right. So an announcement on such a decision will be made tomorrow afternoon, in fact. Now, fourth dose vaccinations began on February 28th for workers and residents of nursing homes, as well as the immunocompromised. And that may be expanded to include the elderly, namely 60s and older. That's because recently, nearly 20% of new infections are from those 60 or older. And the number of critically ill patients and deaths are also in that group as well. So it is a demographic that is of high concern and still a high-risk group. And almost 90% of the elderly have received their third shots, namely the booster shots, but the effectiveness is waning because it has been a while since they have received that third shot. And the US FDA has approved mRNA vaccines, namely the Pfizer and Moderna ones, as fourth shots for those over 50. So there is some sense of that it is safe to initiate those fourth shots.
All right. All in the meanwhile, the central government has started to discuss easing virus restrictions even further. What can we expect at this point?
Right. Well, health authorities are expected to announce later this week what they're calling this new post-Omicron scheme. People are likely to be allowed to go outside mask-free. Health official Son Young-nae said the government is considering what he's been calling comprehensive measures for a post-Omicron scheme. He added that the situation is optimistic as the weekly infection cases have been on a steady decline. Now, the government is also expected to downgrade COVID-19's classification in terms of its severity in a step toward handling the virus as an endemic disease. It is class 1 at the moment, the highest in a 4-tier system. They're looking to downgrade it to maybe class 2. Starting this week as well, community health centers, makeshift testing stations, they're no longer providing these free rapid antigen tests. They'll only do PCR tests for vulnerable groups like the elderly. Also from this week, long-term foreign residents with a record of COVID-19 infection in Korea will not be required to hand in a negative PCR test when they return to Seoul from another country, say if they're going on holiday, for example. Now, the government is mindful, however, of the possibility of new variants and other risks of a resurgence in infections in light with these ease restrictions as well. And health officials have hinted at a gradual return to normalcy without drastically lifting all the restrictions all at once. So we'll have to see and wait until that announcement is made, possibly at the end of the week, because the current social distancing measures, they expire on Sunday, don't they? So possibly Friday is when the announcement will be made.
All right, we'll be on the lookout for those updates as well. Meanwhile, on to our third keyword of the day.
Delegation returns.
So Yoon Suk-yeol's delegation to the U.S. has returned home after a busy schedule in Washington. It seems like there was a lot of practical groundwork. What's the latest?
Right, so Park Jin, who headed the delegation, stressed the delegation's 8-day visit marked what he called the first steps of South Korea becoming a pivotal country globally. He added that the two sides have secured a groundwork for practical policy consultations through broad and substantial dialogue. And he said the new government will do everything to strengthen the strategic partnership of the two allies from day one. And of course, North Korean issues were also discussed during the visit as well. Both sides said it was pretty much back to basics regarding the North Sea denuclearization. The Yoon administration is likely to have more of a hardline stance against the regime. So we'll have to see what kind of policies are drawn up alongside the US. Park said the allies reaffirmed the need to create airtight defenses against North Korea's potential attacks. There's been many provocations recently by the North, including the ICBM, and there are more to come, possibly. Now, to that end, they discussed the possibility of bringing back regular joint military drills, as well as the 2+2 foreign and defense ministers meeting as well. Park said the first summit between Yoon and US President Joe Biden will take place at an early date once the new administration kicks off. An exact date or timeline hasn't really been given yet. And he also voiced hope over Washington's plan to send high-ranking officials to the presidential inauguration as well. There are reports that there will be some high-ranking US officials attending. During the 8-day trip to the US, Park and 6 other members, they've been meeting with various administration officials, lawmakers, think tank experts as well. They included the US Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman, as well as the US Special Envoy for North Korea, Sung Kim, as well. We've pretty much went through what those discussions were in previous segments, so I won't go into too much detail there. But basically, diplomacy with the US seems to be a top priority for the Yoon administration.
All right, and on to our fourth keyword of the day.
Property tax.
It's back. We're talking about it again. Korea's finance ministry on Monday rejected a request by the presidential transition team to temporarily ease those property capital gain taxes for multiple homeowners. What does this all mean?
Right, so it's pretty much a kind of a back and forth between the outgoing and the incoming administrations when it does
Yeah.
come to real estate tax. It's one of the many hot potato issues. And in June, the government imposed heavier property-related tax burdens on owners of two or more homes in some designated areas, of course, in a bid to curb the skyrocketing housing prices. Multiple homeowners should pay taxes worth as much as 75% of capital gains from property sales. Now, the transition team asked the outgoing government to revise an ordinance to the income tax law in a bid to ease heavier capital gain tax burdens on multiple homeowners starting in April for 1 year. They said it will be desirable for the incoming government to implement, the finance ministry said it will be desirable for the incoming government to implement eased measures. That basically means that the current government is not really willing to revise the rules during its term. It's basically tossing the ball over to the incoming administration's
Right.
court. The transition team said the incoming government will seek to take necessary steps to implement them as soon as Yoon takes office on May 10th. But the government is looking to ease tax burdens for owners of two homes to a similar level of single home owners, but it's not quite the measures that the Yoon administration wants. That would, for the outgoing rather administration, that would be on the condition that the owner sells one of the properties or is passed on as inheritance. But the finance ministry did note that such changes would require parliamentary approval. But considering both sides of the aisle want that to happen, any changes are likely to be passed smoothly if it is tabled.
All right, and on to our final keyword of the day.
Shanghai lockdown.
I mean, just wrapping our head around the fact that Shanghai was under a really strict lockdown for weeks on end was puzzling and I think daunting for those who live in Shanghai for multiple reasons, but namely because it is a financial hub. So
Yeah.
China's financial center of Shanghai started easing those standing lockdowns in some areas, but this is all despite recording high numbers on a daily basis.
That's right. Authorities are seeking to get the city moving again, of course, after more than 2 weeks, which has pretty much been under lockdown.
Yeah.
Yes, pressure has been mounting on authorities in China's most populous city as well from residents. They've been growing increasingly frustrated at the curbs being dragged on. Some have even been struggling to find food and medicine, just your basic necessities. And there are also, we should not forget that there are a lot of Koreans either studying or working in Shanghai as well, who are also struggling there. The city officials therefore announced the blueprint for lifting restrictions in specific residential areas. The city is dividing compounds into basically three risk categories, several thousand so-called prevention areas to have their lockdowns lifted if they report no cases for a 2-week period. It was unclear how many people would be able to leave their homes as a result of the changes, however. District authorities said they would publish further details, and among the first districts to be on this release list were the industrial area of Jinshan and the central area of Jing'an, which posted the names of presidential sites still in high and medium risk categories.
The lockdown has been causing concerns not only for local residents in Shanghai, but Korean businesses as well.
Right, so Korean retailers who've expanded actually in Shanghai, they've been the ones who've been badly hit. The lockdown was supposed to end on April 4th, but was extended, of course, creating more problems for these Korean retailers. All 230 stores by the apparel retailer Eland in Shanghai are temporarily closed. Paris Baguette closed 130 branches. Fried chicken franchise BBQ closing 50. Pulmuon doesn't actually operate stores, but it faced a huge drop in sales after Sam's Club and Freshipo, who are wholesale discount stores they supply to, closed. Confectionery maker Orion, cosmetic company Amore Pacific closed their factories in the city on April 1st. Nongshim, Shanghai plant, is closing temporarily as well. But these companies rather do have plants elsewhere in China. Nongshim has one in Shenyang, so it's making up for that lost production. Orion also has many more across the country as well, and they're basically boosting production goals as well there.
All right, so that's what's at stake in Shanghai. Thank you very much, Anam, for the morning's coverage. We'll speak to you again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.